Tonight, we want to put a little humanity back into the conversation, a little more of the heart. So I want to introduce my dear friend, Larry Miller, Ken Oliver. I don't even know what they're going to talk about, but what I know of them, they have incredible stories. They have done incredible things. They're incredible leaders, and they're thinking about doing even more incredible things. So with that, the floor is yours. I know.
Thank you. The first thing I'm going to ask you, Larry, is, well, let me back up and give a little context. Today we've heard a lot about research and data and theory and numbers and who does what. And for me, from the very moment that I got out of prison in 2019, I just went with what I saw in front of me. And I knew that reentry in California looked like the prison system. I knew that what should be the happiest moment for men and women exiting the justice system and starting their lives over should be a happy moment in their life, not a miserable one. And so I really became passionate about redesigning, re-architecturing, reshaping what reentry should look like for folks, really centered on skill development and how people could access livable wage, because I paroled to the Bay Area in California, and for those of you who know about the Bay Area, it's probably one of the most expensive places to live in the world. And as a 52-year-old man exiting the prison system, I wasn't exactly excited about working somewhere for $15 an hour living in San Francisco Bay Area. And so I wanted to understand why there weren't opportunities and what I could do to position myself for opportunity, and then how I could also position others so that they didn't have to face some of the things that I saw in the reentry system. And that journey, led me to a wide variety of things in the reentry space in California, which we'll talk about later. But along that journey, when I landed at Checker, I had the good fortune of meeting someone who used to be an EA at Nike. And she asked me one day, almost 3 years ago now, have you ever heard of Larry Miller? And I said, no, I haven't. And she sent me an article, I think it was the one in Sports Illustrated, and I just read in that 5 minutes his story, and I was like, man, how can I meet this guy? And she said, fly up here to Portland, and I'll take you to the Nike campus, and you can meet him and talk to him. And that's what I did. And I knew the moment that I talked to him and heard his story, heard his trajectory, I hope you remember me asking you. I said, listen, I don't have many asks today. I said, I just want to know if you'll be my mentor. And he agreed, and tonight, hopefully he shares and inspires you the way he inspired me. So Larry, I'd like to first talk a little bit about something that wasn't talked about today, which is the mindset shift that happens with those of us who were justice involved. Because it doesn't start with the employers, it doesn't start with when you get out of prison necessarily. It actually starts while you're in prison. So can you talk a little bit about when you were inside of prison, what point did you come to and what was the cause for your change?
So from the age of like 12, 13, all the way up till 30, I was in and out of jail, and convicted of all kinds of crimes. One was second-degree murder. I pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. Was sentenced to 4.5 to 20 years. Did the 4.5, got out, and was caught up in the cycle of recidivism. Like you get out, you go right back to the same neighborhood, you go right back to the same thing that you were involved in, and before you know it, you're right back in jail. The last time I was arrested, I had 5 armed robbery charges, and my oldest daughter had been born not too long before that. And when I got to prison that last time, I really started to think about what I wanted to do with my life at that point. And I knew I wanted to be there for her. I knew I wanted to try to make sure that she was okay. And so I started thinking about how could I change my life? And I started to get really serious about, I don't want to live this life anymore, but I didn't know what to do. At that point, I knew I wanted to change my life. I knew I wanted to do something different, but I didn't know what. And, all my life, I've always been pretty good at learning at schools. I'm a reader, all those things. And so there was the opportunity to get a college education. I had gotten my GED when I was incarcerated earlier. And so I got involved in taking college classes while I was there. And there were a number of colleges that were teaching classes inside the jail, and Pell Grants were available for inmates at that point. And so I took advantage of Pell Grants. And also, I was in prison in Pennsylvania, and the prison at that time had a program where it was education and work release. So you could actually qualify to live in trailers that were outside the jail wall and leave every day and go to school or to work and just have to be back by 8 o'clock at night. If you were a minute late, they would take you back inside. When I heard about that program, the initial motivation was, well, hey, if I got to do time, that's the easiest, if I can leave every day. But once I got into the program, I really started to believe that this was the vehicle for me to change my life. I got my associate's degree while I was in that program at Montgomery County Community College in Pennsylvania, and had great counseling advice while I was taking these classes, and was able to transfer pretty much all of my classes from Montgomery County to Temple University. Of all things, and I heard this came up a little earlier today, but of all things, I decided I was going to major in accounting. As a criminal, I was going to be an accountant. So I started taking accounting classes at Temple, got my associate's degree at Temple, my bachelor's degree at Temple in accounting, graduated with honors, and thank you. And when I was about to graduate, and I mentioned this was mentioned a little bit on the film, but when I was about to graduate, it was what was called the Big 8 accounting firms at the time. And if you were graduating with an accounting degree, your goal was to work for one of the Big 8. And so that was my goal coming out of school. And I had kind of zeroed in on I interviewed with a lot of them, with pretty much all of them, but I had kind of zeroed in on one was called Arthur Andersen. You may have heard of them. I kind of zeroed in, actually I'm glad they didn't hire me now, but I kind of zeroed in on Arthur Andersen, and I went there, spent the whole day interviewing with a number of people all day long, and all day in the back of my mind I'm thinking, should I share my background with these folks? Because all they knew was I was a young black man about to graduate from Temple University with honors, and they were interested. And so all day I'm thinking, should I share my story? Should I share my background? So finally I get to the last person, who was like the hiring manager. And I decide I'm going to share my story with this guy. So I start talking to him and start sharing with him. And as I'm talking to him, I can kind of see his face changing and like not in a good way. And finally I get done, and he said, wow, that's an amazing story. He said, he reached in his pocket and he pulled out an envelope and he said, I have an offer letter here that I was all ready to give you, but I can't give it to you now. He said, I can't take the chance on something happening. I wish you the best, but I can't hire you. And at that point, I felt there were two things that kind of came to mind for me. The first one was, this is a waste of my time. I'm going through all this, I'm putting out all this effort, I'm trying to change my life, but they're never going to let me be a professional or build a professional career because of my background. And so I'm just wasting my time. I may as well go back to what I was doing before. But I decided that I was going to keep pushing forward. I wasn't going to stop. I wasn't going to quit. But the other decision that I made was that I was not going to share this information going forward. If it came up, if someone asked, or if it was a question, I wasn't going to lie. I wasn't going to deny it. But I wasn't going to volunteer the information. And for 40 years, that's how I built my career. People that I worked with closely, people that I consider family, I was so close to them, had no clue about my background. My oldest daughter, the one that I was kind of inspired to change for, started to put pressure on me. Dad, you need to share your story. It can benefit some people. It can inspire some people. And I just kept pushing back on her because for all those years, I was afraid of this story coming out because my concern was if this came out, that it would ruin everything that I had built up to that point. So I continued to push back on her, and she continued to. I used to say she pushed me, but she said, Dad, you got to stop saying that. So say I inspired you. I'm like, okay, you inspired me. So she's like, stop saying you pushed me. So she inspired me. And eventually I agreed, and her and I started to work on it together. And because I told her, I said, if I'm going to do this, we're going to do it together. So for over, I guess, 10 or 12 years, her and I would get together, and I would tell stories, she would ask questions, and she would record it and then go back and transcribe it. And we worked on this for, like I said, 10, 12 years. And finally we had this document. It wasn't a book. It was all these stories and all this information. And then we connected with some people that helped us to really put it in book form. And it's been amazing for me since this book has come out. I had a list of people that I want to make sure that I wanted to share with before they heard it somewhere else, before they heard it in the news. Some people that I was close to, I wanted to share with and have them hear for me. And at the top of that list was Michael Jordan and Phil Knight. And it was during pandemic, so I had to reach out to them and say, hey, I sent both of them a text and said, I've got something personal that I'd like to talk to you about. And Phil got right back to me, MJ got right back to me. I ended up talking to Phil first and went through and shared the story with him about my daughter, encouraging me to share the story. And when I was done, he said, when you said something personal, I didn't know what to expect, but I can absolutely tell you it wasn't this. But he said, but I agree 100%. He said, you need to share this story. And he said, not only is it inspirational, but it's aspirational. And I'll support you in that however I can. And a day, I think it was the next day, I ended up talking to MJ. And same thing, I kind of shared the story with him. I go through the whole deal. And when I was done, it was silence on the other end. And it was probably a couple seconds, but it felt like a couple hours. And then he said, I agree with your daughter. You need to share this story, and whatever I could do to help, I'm here. And once I heard from those two guys that they were supportive and encouraging, that kind of reinforced for me that I was doing the right thing by sharing the story. And them, Nike, MJ, Jordan Brand have all been extremely supportive throughout this whole time period that the story came out. One of the best things that came out of the story for me was that I got an opportunity to meet with the family of the young man that I shot. I was 16. I was drunk on cheap wine. I was angry because one of my friends, one of my gang members had been killed, and he was just happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time, and it was senseless. Every day I wish I could go back and undo it, but I can't. But fortunately, I was able to meet with his family, and I sat down with them and expressed my remorse and sorrow for what I had done. And each one of them talked about how what happened had affected them. But at the end of each one of them speaking, they said, but I forgive you. And at the end, we hugged, and there were tears and forgiveness, and that really meant a lot to me, because over the years I've tried to forgive myself for what I did. I've asked God for forgiveness multiple times, and to have the family say, hey, we will forgive you, that meant a lot and went a long way for me. So that to me was probably the best thing that came out of this story. The second best thing was meeting Ken.
I'll take that, Larry. I'll take that. We've heard a lot today, Larry, of people talking about what are the things we can do from a research standpoint, from a data standpoint, to really get the ball across the finish line or in the basket. We're talking about basketball. To get employers and society to change their perspectives about people who've been involved with the justice system, to implement change management and bring people into their companies to give them a fair shot. And one of the things that I brought up a few times today, but I wish that we would have more of the conversation around, are the motivating factors of us as young black men in neighborhoods and inner cities and communities, and the types of things that we think about and the types of things that push us to the margins, right? I'm a big advocate, those of you who've heard me talk about not just any employment, livable wage employment and access to economic mobility, because I know for a fact through my own lived experience and through others that it's the great equalizer. But I want you to just share a little bit about the story that we talked about when we met at the Nike campus, about what you shared with me about when you were young and the aspirations you had just to like earn basic legitimate money.
Yeah, no, I remember telling you, I remember sitting on the steps in West Philadelphia with some of my friends, and we were just sitting there talking about life and talking about different things. And I remember saying, I not only thought it, I said, you know, man, if I could make $500 a week, I'll get a job. I'll work every day and I'll work hard but ain't nobody gonna hire me and pay me that kind of money. That was the mentality. It's like, you know, in my environment, that wasn't a possibility for me as far as I could see. And I think that is a big part of the issues that we deal with and that our folks deal with. It's like there's the hope that there is an opportunity to change is just not there. And it's not there because the opportunities haven't been provided in the past. And I'll share this quote again, but there's a quote that I heard that says, in this world, talent is distributed equally, but opportunity is not. And that is just absolutely the case. And to me, I think, you know, the more we can provide opportunities, the more we can provide hope for people to be able to feel like they can earn a livable wage, that they can, you know, support a family and carry a mortgage. I think, to me, that's what would allow people to change their life and what would motivate people to change their life. You know, to me, just the opportunity that I was able to take advantage of, it doesn't exist anymore. That program was shut down in the mid-90s. So if I was coming out today, I couldn't do what I've been able to do. But to me, we need to figure out how to provide more of those opportunities for people so that they do believe that there's a change, there's the opportunity and the ability to change. And right now, I think, you know, a lot of people don't believe that. I know it took me a while to believe that I could actually do something. Like I said, I almost was ready to say, you know what, this is a waste of my time because no one's going to allow me to change. And I think today, again, the other reason I couldn't do what I've been able to do is because there's too much information out there today. Like, I couldn't hide today. I couldn't, you know, my story, my information would somehow have leaked out today because there's so much information and people are always out looking for information. So to me, it's like, how do we change the perception of people who've been formerly incarcerated who really want to change their life? How do we change that perception? And that's where stories like Ken's and mine and other, one of the things that's been amazing to me is that since my story came out and I've been kind of sharing, I've met so many people like Ken and tons of other people who have come home, who were in the system, who've come home and are doing amazing things. And those stories need to be told. Those stories need to be shared because that's what's going to change people's mentality. That's what's going to change people's perception. One of the things I'm really happy about and proud of is that Harvard Business School did a case study based on my book. They took the book and did a case study based on it. And a couple things that really made me feel good about that. One is there was a graph or a chart in the case study that showed that recidivism rate nationally is somewhere around 70, 75, 77%, meaning 75, 77% of people who were incarcerated who get out are back in the system within 2 to 3 years. But the study showed that if people are able to learn a trade or learn a skill, that 77% drops to 30%. If people are able to get a bachelor's degree, 77% drops to 6%, and with a master's degree, it's at 0. Clear-cut indication that education, learning a skill, learning a trade, something that can provide you a livable wage opportunity, a livable wage job, people don't go back to jail if they're able to do that. And that was amazing to me. The other reason that I was excited about the about the case study is that this was an opportunity to get a story in front of decision makers. Like the first time the class was taught, I went out and it was executive MBA program, and there were 200 C-suite level people. And to me, if we can crack those folks, if we can get people at that level saying like, hey, I believe this is an opportunity, I really want to do this, that's where a lot of change can happen. And I'm a true believer that the companies who realize this first and who get behind this first are going to be winners, because the people that they're going to be able to hire, the folks that they're going to be able to bring on board are some of the most creative, intelligent people I've ever met, are people I spent time with in the penitentiary. And to me, you know, if we can tap into that talent, if we can tap into that creativity, I think there's an amazing opportunity that's there for us overall. And so it was pretty amazing to me. I was there when they taught the class, and when the instructor first started out, he said, hey, you guys have all read the case, you know the story. Would you hire Larry Miller? If you were there at that point in time, would you have hired Larry Miller? And probably 70 to 80% said no at the beginning of the class. By the time the class was over, that had flipped to 70, 30% saying yes, they would have given an opportunity. And to me, that's what we need to do. We need to figure out how to share more success stories, let people know that there are a bunch of Ken Olivers out there that if you give someone an opportunity, that if you give these folks an opportunity, they're gonna definitely come through and be, you know, top-notch employees for you. And so that's kind of what I've been pushing on and, you know, been talking about. And Ken and I are working on some things that we're trying to figure out how we can help to make that happen.
Thank you for that, Larry. One of the things, I've heard a million stories from Larry, and every time I listen to him and get to spend time, every time I get a chance to spend time with him, I learn something new. So we were at an event last week, and I've said before that, you know, Larry is the consummate case study for why every single C-suite, every single boardroom needs to have somebody with this type of lived experience. And the reality is that's because we see things that other people don't, and vice versa, right? But the more diversity you have around the table, the better chance you are going to get to the best idea, whether that's around a product or whether that's around a marketing decision or whatever. And I heard a story that I'm just going to make Larry tell because it fascinated me when we were in Silicon Valley a few weeks ago, and his friend who took over the Jordan brand when you went to the Portland Trailblazers said, Larry, you know, do you remember when Phil Knight came and said he wanted to give the Jordan shoe to X? I'm gonna let you tell that story because I feel like that was a genius move on your part, and it exemplifies some of the perspective that justice impacted people or people with different lived experiences can bring to a major brand like Nike.
So when we were starting Jordan as kind of a separate brand within Nike, we had a lot of resistance. A lot of people. We were doing this at the time that Michael Jordan was retiring from the Bulls for the last time, because he did that a couple times.
We're in Chicago now.
Yeah. I know that's a sore spot here in Chicago. But he was retiring from the Bulls for the second time, and there was a lot of feeling that, hey, it was it was a great run. It was a great situation, but it's over at this point. But there was a group of us that felt like we still had the opportunity to build something around that logo, even though Michael wasn't going to be playing anymore. And so I was asked by Phil Knight to put a team together and put strategies together on how we were going to do that. And one of the first things we did was identify who our core consumer was going to be. And we identified that core consumer as, you know, young, in the kid who was a basketball player but was also a leader on the court. Was the guy that was the freshest dresser on the court. That's who we targeted. And the story that Ken is talking about, we had kind of started to move, and things were starting to happen for us as a brand. And I was in my office one day, and I got a call from Nike had what was called Hollywood promo. these folks were responsible for getting Nike product into videos, movies, TV shows. And so they called and said, hey, we just got a call from NSYNC. And NSYNC was hot at the time. They were a hot group at the time. And they said they're going to be performing at halftime at the Super Bowl, and they want to wear the latest, hottest Jordan stuff for you guys. I was like, let me think about that for a minute. Let me get back. I was like, let me get back to you. Let me get back to you. And I got my team together actually, and we kind of tossed it around the table, and the team was actually split because half the team was saying, hey, this is the Super Bowl, and as we're kind of an evolving and growing brand, to get our logo out on the Super Bowl at halftime will be amazing. But the other half of the team was saying, yeah, but it's NSYNC. And nothing against NSYNC. They just won't resonate with our consumer, with the consumer that we're targeting. And so it came down to I had to make the decision, and I decided not to do it. And I called them up and said, hey, we appreciate the opportunity, and if NSYNC wants to buy Jordan product, we'd be glad to sell it to them. But we're not going to use them to sponsor our brand, because I could just see our consumer, the guy we're targeting, saying, I don't get it. You know, NSYNC, I don't get it. And so those were the kind of decisions that we had to make. And I think, to Ken's point, I think my experience, my background, my perspective, because of where I come from and what I've lived, helped me to see that and to say, you know, this is not going to work with our consumer, because I kind of know how they think and I kind of know where they come from. And my perspective has always been, having diversity at the table leads you to a much better decision. If you're trying to make a decision on something and you got 10 people in the room, and all 10 of those people come from the same background, the same perspective, see things the same way, there's only one possible solution that can come up, and that's the solution that they're all going to see. But if you've got multiple perspectives in the room, if you got people looking at it from different angles and different ways and different backgrounds, I 100% know that that's going to lead you to a much better decision. So to me, I think my perspective and my background in the role that I've been in has definitely helped with Jordan Brand kind of getting to where it's been.
Thanks for that, Larry. Well, I want to rewind and zoom out just for a second and talk a little bit about what happens before the skill development, because you and I talk a lot about the mindset and having people like mentally prepared to make the decision to want to do something. And then the next phase after that is the skill deficit, which you mentioned too when it comes to education and getting a skill. Because I do want to double down on the fact, and I'm a firm believer in this, that the first topic of conversation, or the first person we have to have a conversation with, is ourselves, as justice impacted people. Right? It's not on the employers, it's not on the University of Chicago, it's not on society, it's on us. We have to look in the mirror and make the decision that we're ready to step into whatever opportunity is out there, and we have to prepare ourselves to compete with the same kids that are coming out of University of Chicago, Cal Berkeley, Stanford, or whatever else. So that first preparation, that mental preparation to make the decision that you want to win, that you want to be successful, has to start here, right? I was mentioning earlier today at dinner that I started my reentry process the day that I went to prison. I didn't wait until the day I got out or 90 days before I got out to figure out what I wanted to do. The day that I went in, I knew that I wanted to prepare to hit the ground running for the day that I got out. And I went about that process for 24 years. It was a long preparation process, but that's what I did. And so I think the first step in all of these conversations that we heard today is getting the mindset right of the folks that are in prison to make sure that they want to step into the opportunity that all of you great people are out here trying to create for people once they actually get out. Right? It's not mystical. It's not magic. People who are motivated and want to do something and want to succeed, we want to support them, stand shoulder to shoulder with them, love them up, lift them up, and prepare them for success once they reintegrate into society. Larry, I want to ask you, if you were in today's ecosystem where you did have to have your background checked and all of that, how do you think your approach would be different when it comes to navigating the workforce space? What are some of the ways that you think that you would respond to rejection? Because one of the things I really respect about you, and I think I model in my own life, is the tenacity not to give up. And so I'd like to hear you talk a little bit about how you faced rejection, kind of like you did with Arthur Anderson, but what you would do today.
Well, like I said, I think today would be a lot more challenging just because of the access to information and the information that's available for people out there. But, you know, I was just thinking as you were talking, like every time I went to jail, which was many times, every time I would always be like, man, I don't want to do this no more. But I wasn't serious about it. I was saying that, I was like, yeah, no, I ain't but I hadn't really made that change, that decision here, like you were talking about. And to me, that's exactly where it starts. It starts with saying, you know what, I sincerely want to change. I sincerely want to do something different with my life. That's where it starts. And then the next step is, how do I do that? What is it that I can do if I'm sincere about doing that? How do I? And I really believe that a lot of people get to the first step, but then they can't get past the second step. They can't figure out how to do it. I know there were a lot that when I coming in and out, there were times that I'm like, man, I don't want to do this anymore. But I didn't know how. I didn't know what it was that I should do. And when I was exposed to the education opportunity, that was like, okay, this is how I'm going to do it now. I think I see how now I can do this. And I think that's one of the goals, is to how do we try to provide opportunities for people to see how they can change. But in today's world, it would be a lot more challenging. And I think that's why it's so important that this movement that all of you folks are here to talk about and be involved in, that's why it's so important for this movement to change that perspective so that people can decide that they want to change their life and then be given the opportunity to be able to do that. And right now, you know, that's really, really challenging because, again, coming out now, if you don't have a support system, if you don't have something that's providing an opportunity for you to make a decent living, if you don't have a way of kind of seeing where you can go and how you can provide for your family, chances are folks are going to, that's why that number at 77 or 75% is so high, because people don't know how to change. They don't know what it is that they need to do, or they might know what they can do, but they just don't know how to go about it. Like I said, for me, it was education. For other people, one of my best friends when I was incarcerated, he and I go back to when I was 16 years old. We were incarcerated together. He learned how to cut hair when we were, I was one of his first customers, and he messed me up pretty bad. But since he was my friend, it was okay. But he learned how to be a barber, got out, opened up a shop, employed other people, became a contributing member of his community. To me, so for me it was education, but for other folks it might be another route. But to me, we have to figure out how do we provide that opportunity and that route to give people the ability to change when they want to. But it does start, to your point, Ken, it starts here. It starts with that desire to, and the commitment that I want to do something different with my life. I want to change my life.
Thank you for that, Larry. Well, one last point I want to make, and then we can open it up to the audience for questions. I know people have questions of Larry. I want to talk a little bit about the social ripple effect and how important that is, and hear your perspective, because you've been on the road for about 2.5 years now, talking to people all over the country, going inside of prisons, reentry programs, university campuses.
Yeah, you've been working me pretty hard.
That's true. That's very true. That's very true. You know, one of the things that is important around the narrative change is not just for the narrative change for companies, and it's not just important for the narrative change for society. It's really important for the narrative change to happen within our own communities, with ourselves. And for me, I can't even count the number of people who I left behind who were in prison cells, even people I grew up with who aren't in prison cells, who call me, send me mail, give me shout outs, because of the way that I've impacted their lives. I've gone into women's prisons and, talked to hundreds and hundreds of women in prison and talk about how I've impacted their lives, and that because they see me doing what I'm doing, they now have hope. These are their words. I now have hope. You've now convinced us it's possible to do something else. So it goes to that light that I was talking about. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about some of the responses that you've gotten from people across the country, in prison, outside of prison, and how important it is for people to see themselves in this trajectory of success and possibility.
Yeah, I guess it was, because you've been working me pretty hard. I guess I was in Philly maybe 3 weeks ago. Was it 3 weeks ago? Yeah. And my daughter and I actually it was my daughter and my two granddaughters, which was amazing to have them be a part of this with me. But we actually went into the Juvenile Justice Center in Philadelphia. And this was the second time we've been in there. And I go in there and I sit down, and this is in Philly, it's my hometown, and I see these young people and I see myself sitting in those chairs. I see, the attitude, just everything about them, I see myself sitting in that chair. And when I go in and talk to them, but my hope is that they can see themselves in me, that they can look back at me and say, wow, if he comes from where I am right now, but he was able to do this. He was able to change his life. He was able to do all these incredible things with his life. Then maybe I can do the same thing. And that's the message that, to me, to Ken's point, is providing hope for people. They look at us and they say, wow, if these guys who they know were, right where they are or have done all the things that they've done, and if we can come out and become contributors to our community, be people that are doing positive things and trying to help other folks, then they can look at us and say, well, hey, if they can do that, then maybe I can as well. And it provides that hope that they can come out and change their life. And like I said, for me, just having that opportunity was key. And I think, again, the more we can provide those opportunities for people, the better. And and Ken hears me say this all the time, but to me, if we can reduce recidivism, we can reduce crime, because the majority of crime is being committed by people who were already in the system at some point. So if we could cut recidivism in half in this country, that would absolutely reduce the crime rate. Because again, people who were committing crime are now, having legitimate jobs, they're taxpayers, they're, raising families. That to me would make a major, major difference. And the only way we can do that is by providing opportunities for people while they're still incarcerated to start preparing themselves for when they get out. To Ken's point, the day you go in should be the day you start getting ready to come out. And there should be opportunities, there should be programs, there should be things that provide this ability for people to look at and to be able to say, hey, I have some hope here that I can really change my life.
I'll close with just something that's kind of in the theme of what we've been talking about today. For me, since I got in this work, 5 years ago now, it's really about three things, three flywheels that kind of have to work at the same time. None of them exist in silos. They all have to work together. The first one is us. I talked about that a little bit earlier, the mindset, the reskilling, the upskilling, the education, making sure that we've positioned ourselves to go ask an employer to hire us. I don't have the right to look out the window before I look in the mirror. That's a fact. The next thing, and simultaneously what has to happen, is we also have to educate and reskill and upskill employers, because their hiring practices are antiquated. We know about skills-based hiring. We know about the diversity issues, the inclusion issues, and everything else. And so employers need to go to school and be trained just like we have to do that, right? And so there are organizations in this room, but there need to be 10X organizations that are intentionally teaching companies, CEOs, university executive programs, et cetera, on how to onboard and work with inclusive and diverse populations. Not just as impacted, neurodiversity, people with disabilities, LGBTQ community, handicap, veterans, the whole nine. All of these populations are the workforce of tomorrow, and we need to understand as executives and leaders in this country how to work in an inclusive workforce and invite all people in who are talented and the best people for the job. The last group that I think plays an important role in the first two parts of that flywheel is policy. Right, I've sat with secretaries of labor who've said, like, there's just not a lot of workforce education policy geared at just as impacted people at the federal level. At the state level, there's not a lot of legislation and budget asks being talked about on how do we unlock buckets of money to train and reskill a population, just like we did with Job Corps in the 70s when we did that for youth. That same thing needs to happen for people reentering society. Because what's happening now is they're putting people on a bus with a $200 piece of gate money and saying, go to the biggest city near you and fend for yourself. People are not skilled, they can't enter the workforce at middle class wages, and therefore they end up floundering, and to Larry's point, they end up recidivating over time because they can't access economic mobility. So I would say those three things are the most important things that we think about, and not independently, all together. How do we make all three of those things work? How do we encourage public-private partnerships? How do we go to legislation and say, hey, what kind of incentives can you create for employers, right? Not just WOTC, but other stuff like salary subsidies. What about the creation of apprenticeship programs or paid internship programs specifically geared at justice impacted people, right? How do we create indemnity for businesses and companies at the legislative level, right? Because it's a pain point for legislators. In California, our corrections budget is $17 billion, right? We're spending about $140,000 a year to lock a person in a cage for a year. Right, so there has to be a better solution. So if we can think about those things in that kind of holistic framework, and how do we get to the stakeholders and make sure it's a win-win for them, a win-win for the cost-benefit analysis that the legislators want, a win-win for business because they get to increase their P&L and get a broader employee base, and a win-win for us as just as impacted people who finally get to earn a decent, legitimate living and build a life for our families and everybody else and be good community members. So I'll stop there and then open it up for questions. I know we probably have some questions to Larry, so here you go.
I really appreciate you following your daughter's inspiration and sharing your story here. If you're working on like storytelling stuff, want to make sure that you know about like the formerly incarcerated college graduates network, about 1,700 of us across 43 states. 100 and some of us have doctoral degrees, 200 and some with master's degrees. There's lawyers in there. I know like a physician in there, a state representative in there, but just lots of stories there.
Right.
I'd be happy to like connect you with the FACG and if you're interested there.
Absolutely.
Question though, when I first started in academia, I was at a small liberal arts school, and they were okay taking me in there knowing that I had a criminal background, but told me not to tell anyone. And part of the consequence of that is that I would hide a lot of parts of myself. Physically, I would wear long sleeves so that my tattoos didn't show. Not that they necessarily said I'd been to prison, but they clearly weren't tattoo shop tattoos.
Right.
I would interact with people in certain ways and sort of adjust my demeanor because it might be an indicator that maybe I had been to prison. And I noticed that took a toll on me personally, and also affected the relationships, because the relationships I was constantly monitoring, like, is this person like noticing that I've been incarcerated or not? So you spent a lot more time than I did in that space, and I'm just wondering, like, what kind of effect that had on you personally, what kind of effect it had on your relationships, and how you've like coped with the stressors of that.
No, I feel your pain for sure. I feel your pain for sure. I lived with that for 40 years, being afraid that at some point somehow the story would come out and ruin everything that I built up to that point. I had recurring nightmares for years, wake up in a cold sweat that I was back in jail or on my way back to jail or in a courtroom or something. I had migraines so bad that I ended up in the ER a number of times just because of holding in this stress and walking around with all this anxiety. I know exactly what you're talking about when you say you avoided certain conversations, didn't want to talk about certain things because you didn't want it to lead somewhere you didn't want it to go. I lived that for 40 years pretty much. And it was an absolute burden, both physically and mentally on me. But, and sometimes I even surprised myself that I was able to kind of keep pushing through all that, and not only keep pushing, but kept like put myself in these high profile jobs that made it even like worse. I mean, the Trailblazers job was the scariest job that I had, because as president of Portland Trailblazers, I sat courtside every game, on TV every single game, and I was just sitting there hoping that nobody would be like, yo, I know him. You know? And so I absolutely, and you know, didn't want to talk about certain things with people. Kind of, the folks that I worked with over the years, after this came out, they were like, now I understand. I understand. They always thought I was mysterious, is the way they said it, because I just was always guarded with whatever I shared, because I was always concerned that if I say the wrong thing and somebody says, well, what about that? And then they start me down a path that I'm going to have to like try to avoid going down. So I understand and feel your pain 100%. And it was, I'm thrilled that it's over now. Like the fact that I can now not have to worry about that, not have to carry. I thank my daughter every time I see her. I hug her and just say thank you, because she forced me to remove this burden that I was carrying around for 40 years. And, you know, I've had enough. So I'll tell you a couple little funny stories. So President Obama was coming to Portland, coming out to Nike. This was the last year of his term in office. And we had a guy who was our lobbyist in D.C. named Jesse. Matter of fact, I talked to Jesse today, but he was the lobbyist for Nike in D.C. And so he reached out and said, hey, you know, Obama's coming to town. They're having a reception for him at this hotel downtown, and they want you to come. I was like, okay. All right, that means Secret Service clearance, but okay. So I give them my information, and I don't hear anything back up until the day before he's coming to town. And I'm like, I guess I didn't make the cut or whatever. Anyway, so I'm driving, and this guy Jesse calls me, and he's like, hey, man, you got a minute? I said, yeah, what's up? Jesse said, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, here comes the Secret Service. He said, what's your middle name again? I said, Garland. My grandfather's name was Garland. I'm named after him. He said, oh, you're good, man. There's this Larry G. Miller guy that's got all these felonies and stuff. And so, you know, but you're good. I was like, okay. But they didn't put together that it was the same person. They did not put it together that it was the same person. So I ended up going and hanging out with Obama. But I was always nervous about anything that had anything to do with security or background checks. I was always nervous about that. I never applied for, I travel, and again, now Ken's got me traveling even more, but I've always, since I've been working, traveled a lot. I never applied for TSA Pre. I never applied for global entry. I finally applied for TSA Pre 2 years ago after the story came out, and they turned me down. So they told me I couldn't qualify because of my criminal background, which for crimes that happened 40, 50 years ago. So.
Yeah, I want to hit on Larry's point, because, you know, I know obviously from talking to Larry about how it affected his health, and hearing this from you, you know, I've always been, I understand clean slate, and it's one of the things that are needed to activate in this society because of the discrimination. But to me, clean slate has always been like don't ask, don't tell, right? And we live in a digital age, and if we don't talk about it and we don't understand it, we can't change the narrative, right? And I heard somebody earlier today mention like the trajectory that happened with the way we talk about the LGBTQ community in the early 90s. Like in the 80s, when I grew up, it was taboo to talk about. You couldn't talk about it. Then in the 90s, they had some small local wins. It picked up traction. And now, you know, it's normalized as far as in narrative and conversation. And I tell people often that my hope and my invitation to society and to people like us in this room is that we can normalize the conversation about what justice involvement looks like. Because at this point, Martha Stewart, Charlie Sheen, like everybody and their mother has some type of record. The former president, I mean, I know, I mean, you know, I know CEOs and COOs and other people that have conviction histories that people don't know about because of my proximity to having conversations with them. But it's not an indicator of who you are. It's a moment in time that you made a decision based on a set of circumstances. It certainly should not define you for the rest of your life. It doesn't define us in all the other mistakes that happen in life. If someone tells a lie, we don't call you a liar for life. If you do one other thing, we don't say that you're a thief for life. And that should still be the case when it comes to being justice involved. We should be able to shake that scarlet letter and move on with our lives. And I do believe, and my hope is that we can normalize the conversation and say, yeah, this is what it was. This is what happened. Like it was a very poor decision. Like Larry said, I wish I could take it back, but that we accept people for where they are and who they are and where they're at a given moment of time. So, my chest goes out to you for having to go through that. And we work every day, and I work every day to try to normalize the conversation so you don't have to go through stuff like that.
I just want to add one more thing too, is that, in this society, there's shame in overcoming obstacles. Like, people are ashamed to talk about the things that they've overcome in their life because we associate shame with that. But the reality is there should be no shame in overcoming obstacles. The fact that you were able to overcome it and get your doctorate or whatever, there shouldn't be any shame in that. There should be shame if you didn't overcome the obstacle, but the fact that you overcame it should not be shame. But in this society, that's how it is right now. But, to me, we have to get to a point where there's not shame in overcoming obstacles. You should be applauded for overcoming the obstacles that you get my applaud for sure.
Do we have another?
I left that college and I'm now at the University of Washington, so that's part of how I sort of dealt with it.
Congratulations.
I was like, no, goodbye. I'll go somewhere where they do welcome me.
Congratulations. We have a question with the young woman here.
Thank you. A good evening. I'm tired, but this is worth every moment. And so, Mr. Miller, I would love to know, you've been traveling, telling your story. What's next for you? And as you pay it forward, how are you reaching back to make sure that this work continues? Because your story amplified, and I'm from South Central Los Angeles, and I tell people all the time, where I'm from, I shouldn't even be here, let alone here. But I have this moment, I have this day, and I have this present, which is a gift. And you have a gift. And so again, I'm just curious what's next, and how can, again, people get behind you to know that it is coming, because we have so many soldiers still to save. And they need to know that if you did it, I did it, she did it, and everybody else did it, we can. But if we don't amplify the voice, they're not going to know. Because if you can't see it, you don't believe it. Thank you.
Well, before I let him answer that, hats off to South Central Los Angeles. I grew up on 23rd and Central. Well, Larry?
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, one of the things that Ken and I are working on. Because for all that time I was avoiding my background, I didn't know all the work that was being done in this area. I didn't know how much work was being done. I didn't know that there were people like Ken and folks in this room who are working to change the situation for folks. I wasn't aware of that. Once my story came out and I started to become aware of it, my focus became, how can I help these organizations that are out here doing work? How can I lend support? How can I do, and that's basically what I've been doing. But now Ken has, as he's putting me to work here these days, he and I are actually working on something where the goal is going to be, how do we amplify those voices? How do we tell those stories so that we do change people's mind? And the thing that I don't want people to say, and I've heard it, is, oh, you're an exception. No, I'm not an exception. I took advantage of an opportunity. There are hundreds and thousands of other people out here who've done the same thing, and they're millions and hundreds of thousands more who would do the same thing if they had the same opportunity. So we're working on something that we're going to be hopefully announcing pretty soon that is focused on amplifying those stories and sharing the stories about people who have been in the system but have come out and not only been successful but are giving back, going back and reaching out to other folks and help. And so my best friend when I was incarcerated got out a few years ago after 52 years. But for the whole time I was out, every time I was in Philly, I'd go back to see him. I took care of his mother. And I've always stayed connected to that part of my life. Even though I didn't want it to get out, I stayed connected to it because I didn't want to lose that sense of grounding that gave me. But we are absolutely focused on how we can amplify and tell these stories and make people understand that there's so much opportunity out here to incorporate folks who have this background but can bring something positive to the table for whoever they're connected with, whether it's University of Washington or whoever it is. They can bring something or Nike. They can bring something positive to the table, and so we're gonna we're on it. We're working on it for sure.
I just wanted to add at Table 8, shout out to Table 8. I am 8 weeks into this work. Just 8 weeks. I think I started my job August 4th with Resilience Education. And my CEO or executive director will tell you that I told her, if you don't hire me, I would do this job for free. And she said, well, I won't let you do it for free. But I literally tell her this. And I did not know what I did not know, that I had a passion. But again, I live this. I grew up with this. It is me. And again, to sit and listen to Khalila's story, to sit and listen to my colleagues' stories, to know that, again, we have so much more work to do, and it is an honor and a privilege to serve those who are unaware. And we have an absolute responsibility to educate the masses. So let's take the research and put the research in the hands of those who are willing to take the first step, to be bold and to be swift, because again, they needed help yesterday. And we need to let them know that we are coming, we are here. And Resilience Education through businessship and entrepreneurship, I had to put a plug in, you all understand.
Tierney, you have your brand ambassador right there, Tierney, if you're in the house.
But again, I just wanted to over amplify. I am honored to literally have a seat at the table and to tell our story. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any more questions? Oh, we got one. Harris.
So I'm curious, you've been with the Blazers, Jordan Brand, now you're traveling around the country, traveling around the world talking about this. What's been the most surprising thing for you, Larry, as you get really involved in the fair chance hiring movement, either from an employer side or a nonprofit side or a reentry side? What's the thing that's like, that you keep thinking about, that's been the most surprising thing that's just sticking in there?
Yeah, I guess, like I said, the thing that's really impacted me is how much and how many people are really seriously trying to change this system. I mean, there are a number of organizations, there are people who were formerly incarcerated, there are people who've never been in the system and had no interaction with the system, but they understand and they recognize that this is something that needs to change, that this is something that's not working, and that this is something that can help not just the people that are involved, but can help our society, our communities that people live in. And I think, the more we can get that message out, and that to me has been one of the biggest, because again, like I said, coming into this, I had no idea that that this work was being done. I mean, at Nike, we were doing Band the Box and stuff like that, and I was like, okay, there's some cool things, but I had no idea that there were so many organizations and so many dedicated people that were really looking to change this system and to correct the system. And and fix something that is absolutely broken. It's absolutely broken, and the recidivism rate and all the things that are telling us that this is absolutely broken, and to see that there are people who get that and are out here doing everything they can to try to change it. And again, a lot of them are folks who have been impacted by the system, but a lot of them are people who've never been impacted by the system, but they, like I said, recognize that something's wrong and they want to help to fix it. And that's what's been the most, I think, surprising thing to me, is just to find out that there are so many people that are looking to improve this, and then it's like, okay, how can I do more? How can I help to amplify this? What more can I do to try to move this forward and to help the people that are doing this work? How can I? And I that's why I'm so thrilled that I was able to connect with Ken, because to me, I had all these ideas and all these thoughts, and connecting with him, we were thinking and looking at things the same way, but he's much better at explaining stuff and putting it on paper. I mean, Ken can explain it way better than I can. But to me, that's one of the things that I've been the most surprised, and I guess pleasantly surprised by, is the fact that there's so many people that are really understand and recognize how messed up this system is and want to change it.
I think that's the last one. I'm getting the hook, the old Sandman hook. But before I close, just one last thing before I close, because it's important when we come in these spaces, and I'm in these spaces a lot with hundreds and hundreds of people that talk about people who aren't in the room. And for me, this is about my homies and my friends all over the country that are sitting in a 6x9 right now. The voiceless, the faceless, and there's people in this room tonight, who are inspirations to me, that help motivate me as a peer. And I just want to take a moment for those folks to stand up and be recognized, that are Justice Impact, that have served time in prison, that are leaders in this movement, that are the reason we do this work, is to create the leaders behind them. So Jason, KO, Kenyatta, all of you who have been Justice Impact, stand up just for a second. Stand up, stand up, stand up, stand up. All our Justice Impacted leaders. Yes, yes, yeah. This is the reason that I do this work, is for them. They inspire me, and for all the people that come behind us. That's why we do this work. So thank you for coming out. Thank you for listening to Larry, and thank you for listening to me. And we'll see you tomorrow.